Does somebody need to be baptized in order to be saved? What's the deal with infant baptism? We're going to talk about that and more on the PAC podcast, so join us as we discuss the very important topic of believers' baptism.
What a great topic, because Dave, could I share this? Through the years, I've volunteered from time to time as a volunteer chaplain over at Oneida Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I've received 2 calls in my time there, having to come to help a young couple who just lost their newborn. So either a stillborn or a death very early on, a couple of days into the hospital stay.
Right.
And 2 of these couples wanted me to baptize their baby.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think that their thought behind that was, and I think this could be the thought behind many people saying, well, if I don't get baptized, I'm not going to heaven.
Yeah.
Because somehow in our minds, baptism is what secures salvation. Mm-hmm. And I think today, as we talk about this, I hope that we can talk about scriptures which would tell us, no, that is not the case. Mm-hmm. That baptism does not secure or earn our salvation. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to tell those couples that their child, even though as tragic as his or her death was, that child was in heaven because they were under what the Bible calls the age of accountability. Mm-hmm. And David himself said when he lost his son, he will not come to me, but I will go to him. Mm-hmm. And that implies that he was already raised and with the father, the little baby. Yeah. And David would eventually go and rise and be with him too. But I think that's a concern of people, that if I'm not baptized, am I going to heaven?
There's the regeneration that takes place when we get saved, right? But what people get confused in this is this idea that this act is really what does the saving, or yes, is the end part, the sort of the end cap of your salvation. So it's like it starts with you're giving your life to Christ and you believe in Jesus and you're repenting of your sins and you're turning to him, and then you get baptized. Now you're saved. And I think that's the mindset a lot of people have. So the one thing I often go to, and many do, is the thief on the cross. Mm-hmm. The thief on the cross is a great example that you need Christ alone to be saved. And he looked at Jesus, believed in Jesus, and trusted him.
And Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise.
Absolutely. So some would say, well, he didn't have the opportunity to be baptized, right? And that's where it gets complicated. I think the Bible is very clear that is more of an obedience thing to show, as you've said many times, an outward expression of an inward change. Mm-hmm. So we're being obedient to Christ. And if you say, I don't need to listen to Jesus, I can do whatever I want, well, you might not be saved, right? Obedience is an evidence of salvation. Mm-hmm. Although not perfect, we have different desires. So I think that's how I would explain it. Yes, it's evidence of salvation. It is not a part of your salvation.
That's a perfect way to describe it, Dave. Mm-hmm. It is. If anyone is interested in baptism, could I share this? We always try to have an opportunity for people at Plymouth who are born again, if they've never been immersed, if they've never been baptized, to take that step of faith in obedience to what Jesus says. Mm-hmm. Because part of the Great Commission is baptizing them and teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. Right. So baptism is a part of that outward response that should demonstrate the inward reality that we're born again. Right. And we've run a class on this. And one of the questions I have in that class on baptism is, does my salvation depend on baptism? I want to read the church family what Unger's Bible Dictionary says in regard to this question. Unger's dictionary says, since baptism, is only intended for the regenerate, for those who've been born again, baptism can never be the means of salvation. And so I think that's pretty clear, especially when we read Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, Dave, which says, for it's by grace that you've been saved through faith. And this, not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, right, so that no one should boast. And so if I'm saying to you, I have to get my child baptized before he or she is saved, that is a work, a human work, an act of my own effort to secure my son or daughter's salvation. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9 speak directly against that. No one can be saved by works.
So becoming a Christian, it's not being saved and becoming saved or becoming a Christian. You can't accomplish that through baptism. You have to believe in Jesus. But once you believe in Jesus, you're going to want to obey him and get baptized.
Hmm.
So I think that that is sort of what we're saying here. And there's a lot of people who will take certain concepts and good things that the church had in history and try to explain this is why it's very important. And this is why we say baptism saves, because really it's an obedience thing, and they do this whole chart and everything else, and they're connecting the dots and everything. But when you say things like that, you're confusing people.
Yes.
Right? Baptismal regeneration, as far as the spiritual sense, where we are made a different creation.
Hmm.
Okay, but that's the work of God,
Yes.
not a work of us, right?
That's what's called being baptized into Christ.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So let me ask you, what about somebody that says, I got baptized when I was young, I got saved when I was older? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say a couple of things. If you were baptized as an infant, I would say try to be thankful that your family cared enough about your spiritual formation.
Mm-hmm.
Try to be thankful that your family was trying as best as they could
Mm-hmm.
to lay a foundation for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then could I encourage you to consider adult baptism or believer's baptism?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll just mention this, that every baptism we see in the New Testament is that of someone who's made a deliberate decision to follow Christ. I'll give you a couple of examples. The Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, he says, shouldn't I be baptized now that I've received Christ? The Philippian jailer says the same thing in Acts chapter later on, 16. And then Paul himself, who was a religious Pharisee,
Mm-hmm.
who'd been involved in religion most of his life, if not all of his life up to that point, himself in Acts chapter 22, he recalls that he was baptized after the Damascus Road experience. So no matter whether you're a complete pagan or someone who's, the Philippian jailer who's broken God's commands, or someone even like Paul, who's very religious and has always been religious, Paul still felt that need to be baptized after his conversion. So, yes, I would encourage someone who's been baptized as an infant, no matter what their religious experience and their family's intent, once they become a believer in Jesus as an adult, as an act of their will, then I would encourage them to be baptized, fully immersed.
Now, in case somebody's listening to this, would they say, well, I'm not sure if I was saved when I was baptized, but, now I'm pretty sure I'm saved. So am I going to lose my salvation if I don't get baptized? I would say that your salvation is not contingent on works, which
Exactly.
is, so I want to encourage anybody, because some people get really freaked out about this stuff, and I want to help them understand, like, this is not a conditional,
No.
you're not going to make it or break it with God as far as your, being in the family, out of the family, in heaven, out of heaven, based on this action that you take. But as you said before, if you're like, no, I know that I got saved after I got baptized, then you would encourage them to get baptized.
Yep.
You know?
And that's why, well, if you read church history, that's what the Anabaptists were called. Anna means again in Greek, and it means baptized again. So these were children who, as infants, were baptized by their parents in the Roman Catholic Church. And then, because they received Christ as adults, they were rebaptized.
Got it.
They're called Anabaptists. So anyway, I would like to share a quick story, because some people may say, well, I've been a Christian a long time, but I've never been baptized. Should I be baptized now after decades? I want everybody to know, Plymouth Alliance family, that I misunderstood baptism. And when I was saved, I thought baptism was something that you had to work toward becoming a stronger Christian before you could be baptized. And I don't know why I had that in my mind, but I did. And for years, it wasn't, Dave, until I became a pastor, 2 years after I became a pastor here, that I chose to be baptized finally. And so if anybody's scared and thinking, well, I'm going to be embarrassed, I've been a Christian too. Folks, I was a pastor before I was baptized and immersed.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I took that step. I'm very glad.
And I think sometimes it's good to, like, if you're a fresh new believer and you have to understand the purpose of baptism, sometimes it's okay to learn what that is before you,
Absolutely.
dive in, not literally.
It's why we have the class, Dave.
Exactly. So that you can help people understand this is the purpose behind what we're doing.
Hmm.
And I think that helps people understand um, that once they get it, I mean, you think of the Ethiopian eunuch. He was like, let's do this.
Yeah,
But he understood.
he understood.
And that's important because we're not just going to say, I'm going to do this because that's the next step,
Yeah,
right?
I have seen at Plymouth, and this is why if you're a parent, I discourage parents trying to allow their children under teenage years to get baptized because I think what happens is children see their friends from church getting baptized and they just want to do it because their friends are doing it.
Yeah.
And this is what we want to avoid. We want
Yeah.
to make sure that it's a decision of your will, apart from making an impression on anyone. That's not the point of
That's good.
baptism.
That's really good. Yeah. Well, hopefully that helps somebody today and it can kind of answer some of those questions and, just reassure somebody maybe and encourage somebody too. Maybe they need to be baptized.
Yeah.
Maybe they have been and they don't need to worry about, whether or not that's some salvific thing, because we know it's not. And if they hear a church that has maybe when you hear on the internet or from a church or somebody else when they say baptism saves, it's good to ask them, what do you mean by that? Because
Yes.
if they're talking about, what you described and what I was describing and essentially regeneration when you're saved, well, okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
We need to be baptized into Christ.
But that's a work that God does. Baptism outwardly is a work that we do that doesn't earn salvation. It's what it literally, and I don't like using the word work, but it's an obedience. It's an
Yeah,
action of
it
obedience.
is.
And
But
that is something that Christians want to do rather than, oh, I have to
mhm.
get baptized now. Well,
I think what you said earlier, Dave, maybe we should reiterate one last time. Baptism is an outward demonstration
mhm.
of the inward reality that your heart has been turned over completely to Christ. You've believed that his death on the cross pays for your sin, and baptism is simply an outward acknowledgement of that inward truth.
And maybe a final note here is we're part of the Christian Missionary Alliance, and we agree that this is something that is a choice that somebody has to make. We don't
Yes.
believe that a baby can make that choice.
Yes.
And we understand that there's certain passages that imply that a household gets baptized, but you want to be you don't want to insert in the lines here that and maybe some could say, well, it's like the covenant of the Old Testament. And well, what we're describing though is baptism is not in that same sense because it is a decision, right? And it is a decision that needs to be understood.
Yes.
So yes, a household can get baptized, but you don't want to assume that there are babies within the household
Mhm.
when it just says a household.
It's very dangerous to create a theological foundation stone from uh, implication.
Yeah, and assumptions. And as we've said in previous podcasts, we want to make the clear translate the unclear and not translate the clear with the unclear.
Yeah,
And that's not to say that there aren't arguments on the other side. I'm not saying
absolutely.
that that doesn't exist.
Right.
We just don't believe that they're
Yeah.
solid enough to act on.
And by the way, it's not sinful if someone's been baptized as an infant. That's
Mhm.
not going to send anyone to hell. That's
No.
not a sinful act. I think as Protestants, we need to be careful to try and build bridges with our family who may be of Roman Catholic faith or, Methodists baptize infants.
Presbyterian.
Presbyterians baptize infants, Episcopalians baptize. So my point is, let's not make enemies of our family over this. Let's
Yeah.
be thankful that our families chose to think about our spiritual future in baptizing us. Let's
Yeah.
give them credit.
And let's make sure that we point them to the gospel so that they don't think that that was like, oh, I was baptized, I'm in. And
Yes,
it's like,
good
no,
point.
that's not how that works.
No.
So that's the vital thing. And I think there are brothers and sisters that disagree on this. And I mean, is somebody wrong? Yes, right? There is a point, and I think I categorize this as an somebody is in error, but this is not the obedience issue is more important when you have somebody that says, I don't need to do what Jesus did
Yeah,
or what Jesus asked me to do,
yeah.
right? And some could say, well, I'm saved, but my obedience was backward and when I was younger and everything else. I would encourage them to do it now that they understand.
Absolutely.
And,
I
that, and
couldn't
that's
agree more.
that's where I'm like, I'm not saying that you're out of the family or something like that. You're not a Christian because you
Mhm.
believe this. No, I respect brothers and sisters who disagree,
Right.
and I've heard this to a degree as well. The argument, but what we're saying is the reason we believe this is because of what we've mentioned
Yeah,
before.
I think we are great. The Christian Mission Alliance is a great proponent of what we call the Great Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And the Great Commission is where Jesus told his disciples to go and make other disciples. And then he says, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Right.
and teaching them to obey all that I've commanded. So
That's right.
this is part of the obedience. Maybe I could say this. Christians say, well, it's a bizarre thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obeying Christ isn't always easy, or it doesn't always make common sense. When Jesus said, turn the other cheek, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so baptism may not make sense to us. What a better way! There is no better way to begin our walk with him than to say, I'll obey him even if it doesn't make sense. And I think baptism is a great start to that walk of obedience.
Mm-hmm.
Tithe, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But if we do the baptism, okay, it doesn't make sense. It looks silly. It's some foolish, in the minds of most,
Mm-hmm.
some foolish act of religion.
Mm-hmm.
But to us, we know that Christ commanded us to do things that don't make sense all the time.
Maybe not to us,
Maybe not to us,
but to him.
but to him.
And maybe as we grow, it will make more sense, and we take that posture of humility. So hopefully this helped, and obviously we're not casting anybody out who doesn't agree on this. I think this is a good exercise and respectful dialogue on secondary issues.
Good
so,
point.
So
Thanks,
thank
Dave.
you.